Good morning, 5-1.
How are you, Mr. Bordeaux? Where art thou?
I'm in rainy Vancouver, but it's beautiful.
You know what I love about you, Henry, is every time I see you're like
Oh, geez,
clean
sorry, hang on a second.
shaven, halfway shaven, clean shaven, full
Oh,
beard, semi beard. It's like it's kind of like a what's he gonna look like this week?
well, this is it. This is it for right now. I gotta clean it up. But I've been road tripping a lot, and we've been in quarantine up here in Canada. So I'm like,
Oh, that's
yeah,
right.
whatever. Yeah,
Hey, how's Jim doing?
Mark, have you heard from him?
I haven't heard from him, but I've been seeing posts from Stacy, and it seems like he's in a good spot right now. She's
Okay.
been with him, and she's been doing a lot of the updates for Jim. But it seems like he's okay right now, and that she's been there with him. So
Yeah, I texted him yesterday and he hit me back like almost immediately, so that was good to hear. Dun dun
Hey, good morning,
dun.
sir. How are you?
Good. Hi, I'm Lalo. Nice to meet you.
Good morning, Lala. Where are you coming from?
I'm from Los Angeles.
Hey, all right. I live in LA, but I'm in Vancouver at the moment.
Oh shit, are you working?
No, we're just visiting some family. I got tired of quarantining, so we drove the PCH and the 101 all the way up the coast to visit family, and we're staying up here for a month.
Oh, that's awesome. That's
Yeah, it was rad, man.
a great trip. Great trip.
who are we waiting on? Waiting on MJ.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, hang on, I got it. Okay, here she comes.
Got here on the last minute. I got my coffee. Had to grab my bike. I was speeding through the French Quarter and got the coffee and made it. So success.
So, are your folks okay after the storm?
Yeah, I mean, we got really lucky with this one that just came, and I can't believe that New Orleans has dodged 5 hurricanes that had direct hit trajectories. Um, they've just stopped or turned left or pumped the brakes and go right. Just God
Thank
is looking out
goodness.
for us.
Yep.
It would be very unfortunate to get hit by a hurricane like that in New Orleans right now. We would 100% be looking at a Katrina type of situation if we got hit by a hurricane like that. But we've been looking out for Lafayette and all those cities on the west side of Louisiana. So a lot of them have moved over to New Orleans. So we're holding a lot of those towns and helping them with the recovery effort right now.
Cool.
Yeah, little update, but parents are okay. Parents are doing
Okay.
good. I think we got everyone. We're live on YouTube. We've got Lala with us. Um, Go ahead and get this one kicked off.
Do you want to have everyone switch their to
Yeah,
panelists?
yeah. For everyone who is joining us and who is new and has been with us from the beginning, please make sure to change your chat settings to all panelists and attendees. That helps us direct your questions best and filter out and address everyone's questions. So it's right down there in the chat settings. If you click it, you should see the options to change to all panelists and attendees. Thank you. And to get this one started, welcome back. We have made it to 2.0, which we are super excited to kick fall semester off with. We're going to be doing the hiring process today and starting our 2.0 advanced class sessions with getting hired and getting on the road. So if you've been with us before, I'm going to pass it over to Henry and we'll get the session started and get everything going. Yeah,
Thanks, Mark.
I'm back.
Yeah, I'm happy to be back. And although this is a 2.0 class, it's for everybody. You don't have to have started with the other sessions and lessons before, but it's a good place to start if you're just catching up or if you're new with us. But Today, we are going to do a deep dive on the best and worst part of getting a job on tour, the hiring process. Most people would agree that being interviewed is one of the most uncomfortable situations you can find yourself in, but really the hiring process started long before you ever got the call. So today we're going to cover how to prepare for interviews and the best ways you can bring added value to the table that will make you stand out and increase your chances of landing the gig. So our special guest today is no stranger to this process. With over 2 decades in the industry, Lalo Medina from Monotone Management works with tons of acts like Vampire Weekend, LCD Sound System, The Shins, Foster the People, and you've also been the tour manager with Jack White and the Racketeers for a long time, right? But everybody, welcome to the show, Lalo Medina. Thank you for being here, sir.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for having me.
So where are we starting off
Sorry.
with?
We're gonna start off with resumes because people ask about that a lot, and it's a good thing to have in your arsenal. Briefly, if you've been doing this for a while, I get asked a lot what you should put on a resume as a touring person. And I think if you've been doing this for a while, a lot of people just list their gigs, list their major gigs, and that's a good. It's a good roadmap for people to know who you've worked with. Everybody kind of knows everybody else, so they might know a contact that worked with that. I personally, on mine, I have a list of gigs, but I do actually also put a list of skills because I do enjoy working on also events, and I want to be able to show that my skills are transferable. If you're newer, having a skills-based resume can help if you've only done a couple of gigs, but you have skills that would be really important on a tour, like I know how to manage a crew, or, leadership or time management, or, you've negotiated contracts, things like that can help. It's not really a business where you send your resume out to apply for a job first, but sometimes people will send their resumes to management or agency contacts when they're looking and say, hey, I'm looking, but there's no real specific. Sometimes you see a job posting on like a production board online or something like that, but there's no real specific job listings. But, getting them across to management or agents to let them know that you're available in case something comes up and they have your resume on their desk and they can easily look at it and look at your references. Sometimes you'll get an email from management or from a colleague asking for your resume and saying they want to put you forward for a gig. So it's good to have one. It's good to work on one. And sometimes you won't be asked for a resume until you have that call and the call goes well. You've had a call with management based on reference, and then they want to see your resume because the call went so well. So there's no real specific time that you would need it, but it's important. And I wanted to ask Lalo, from a management point of view, do you look at resumes, and what do you look for on resumes?
Yeah, absolutely look at resumes. Probably the first thing is how long you've been doing it, so that's obviously an important thing. Experience matters. I do look for the bands that you've worked with. I want to see that there's a certain level, a level of band, or a band that, for example, might have a very experienced manager. So the fact that they work with that band is a plus. And then probably the most important thing I look for are references, because I definitely do follow-ups with references on listed on there, because obviously it's such an important thing to make sure that you're bringing in the right person for the job, that you have to do as much research as you can. And but yeah, one thing that I also like to know how long you've worked for each band. So like if I see on a resume that in the last 5 years you have 20 bands on your resume, that to me is a big red flag to say, well, why didn't you stay longer in any of these bands? So quantity is definitely not something that I look for. It's length of time in employment. It's, you know, the references that are on there and the diversity of references that are on there. So if you know, you're only listing PMs on as references, that's good, but I'd love to see, you know, depending on the role, obviously a PM there, a TM, a manager, an agent, a business manager, you know, all of those things, or promoters. They give one a breadth of experience that tells me that you not only are good with the crew, but you're also good with the other people that we deal with and encounter on a daily basis. So if you're listing them as a reference and I know those people, or I know people that know those people, those all go a long way. But I definitely will call. So I want to see, you know, contact information, obviously, for those references, so I can pick those up. And then somebody else had said that they do, Doug, I think it was you put like a sort of a testimonial from those references. That can be very helpful as well. So if I see 3 testimonials from 3 different references that are all, you know, stellar, that's a great thing. But I'm still going to call, and I still want to hear somebody talk about that person in a way that, you know, I may not get by just reading a sheet of paper.
That's great to hear that. Seeing that those of us who have been on a gig for a long time, that is not that's a positive aspect rather than a negative, because, you know, one thing that comes up quite often for those of us who have been on the same gig for a long time, or have been on a gig for a long time, is that sometimes that precludes you from being thought of, because there's the idea, oh, he's on X, so he must be busy. Right. And you know, all it takes is somebody to just think that, and immediately you're not put forward for a gig. So it's good to see that having one artist for a long time is a positive thing. There's a question here from Phoebe, and she asks, you would like to see the references on the resume as opposed to references provided on request. Is that correct? I
mean, they can. I don't want to have to request it, but it doesn't really make a difference, because if I don't see it on there, I'm just going to ask for them. I need references. But generally that cuts a step for me.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly. I've always recommended that. And so I'm glad to hear you say that, because a lot of times it's been told to us over the years to put references upon request, as just sort of like a standard thing you do. But I go against the grain on that and say, list out your contacts, people that will give you a good reference. List them all, because it's a small world. Like you said, if I can see a promoter, an agent, a manager that I know or have heard of, and you have worked with them in some way in the past, I kind of also know what cloth you're cut from in the industry and where your experience may lie. It says a lot about you. And, you know, I see names that I may respect and know that you got good training with, or I know so-and-so, then that's put 6 degrees of separation to 2, you know, and that puts you to the top of that list, right? And the only other big thing that I recommend you put on resumes is to list the management name. I feel that it's easy overlooked that a lot of people just put the band name, the artist name, but you're not just working with the artist, you're working with that manager, that record label, that business management company. You are a rep for 5 major entities in the industry. You're working with them. So I like to list that as well, because it makes the world even smaller and shows, you know, kind of who you've been out with, just not even just the band, right?
Yeah. And I'm not, I'm not for people that are just starting. It doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, people that we've worked with. So like if there's a recent college graduate, I mean, if they can put a professor on there or something, as long as it's in a related field, because, you know, you're trying to get a sense of character from those references. You're not trying to necessarily, you know, gauge experience. You can do that by reading the resume. I want to know what type of person this is, what type of attitude they have, you know, if they're going to be a great team player and really fit well in a group dynamic.
Yeah. it was me that we were talking about putting the testimonial on there, and I think my reasoning for that is the music industry is a very small world. You may not know if I can put 2 or 3 really solid, well-known, respected industry names on as testimonials, the point of a resume is to be concise but to grab your attention. So for me, putting something, just a couple of paragraphs from 2 or 3 really well respected names in the industry, immediately that's saying to you, you're not, that's going to put me above, I would propose that would put me above the person that puts references available on request, because time is an important thing in the music industry. So you can immediately see 3 names that you recognize, that you would trust their judgment. So you can just call them up. You may know them, you may not, but ultimately those are respected people within the industry. And I would suggest that maybe would grab your attention more than you having to dig a little bit further and go looking for the resumes, the references,
Absolutely. I would also say make sure that you get approval from your references. I've had people put references on there, and I called them up and says, "Oh, really? I didn't. Okay, I guess." that to me, it goes along. You're almost lying at that point. And that's not a good start. That's kind of a red flag as well. So definitely be as honest as possible on your resume. We don't it up. Like if you were the production coordinator, don't say you were the production manager, just be honest. Or if you were the assistant, don't say you were the main person. Just be, honesty is a big key. I'm trying to read into not just experience, but the character of a person, the person's personality. And that goes a long way against you if you're not being honest about stuff.
And also, I think, to your point, Lalo, is, if you've only ever been a production runner, that's okay. I have actually seen a resume before where somebody had mostly just been local production runner, but the way they wrote it made it look like they were on the tour with the artist. And that actually put me off more. That it didn't matter to me that they hadn't toured before, but seeing that they tried to overrepresent themselves was, I was like, like you said, it's a little more about the character. So there's no reason to overrepresent yourself.
Especially knowing that those references are actually going to be used. If you fudge on it at all, then I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to find out, and you're off the list, So it's best to just be as honest as possible. Right? Get.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? Actually, really quick before we move on, Emily MacArthur in the chat says she's actually gotten jobs at festivals from cold emailing a resume, but how common is that for touring?
I've done it.
What's that?
I have too, actually.
One of my current jobs that's 3.5 years in, I cold emailed management when I moved to Canada. So I can only speak for that one gig. It's the only time it's worked for me, but it got me that gig. I've still got it.
I've definitely gotten some cold emails from people saying, "Hey, I'm looking for a gig," or whatever, and it just happens to come in right at the time where I'm looking for somebody, and it's definitely happened. So, you don't want to overdo it with that, because what I don't like is it necessarily is a certain level of desperation with, I know some people that as the minute they get home from a gig, they're emailing everybody in their book saying, "I'm looking, here we go." I mean, that actually is helpful, I guess, for some people that are looking. I just don't, I personally start to shut off though after a while, because it starts to get a little spammy for me.
Yeah.
But again, everyone's got to work. So I don't necessarily blame them, and that won't necessarily be a deciding factor for me. It's just all about timing sometimes.
I think that's a great segue into kind of our next topic here. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit, Lalo, about how do you get the gig? So this isn't really a business where you send your resume in to apply for a job. However, often people will send their resumes to management or agency contacts to let them know that they are available, just like what you were just saying right there. Usually jobs are found through word of mouth recommendations via your network. Other teams may recommend you to management, and it's important to keep good relationships. And if you've been with us through all of our webinars up to this point, we've brought relationships up in just about every single webinar. So make sure you're keeping that at the forefront, that everyone is connected and it is a small industry in some ways, and that we all are relying on building strong relationships.
I absolutely start with going with people that I know and trust, and asking them. So I'll email their management contacts, other tour managers, other production managers, say, I'm looking for a guitar tech for this level band. That's also important. And if I strike out there, then I sort of expand the circle of people I ask, and then I go to, the other traditional posting boards, the Bobnets of the world. That's like because then that opens up the pool so large that it's hard for me to really narrow it down. So
I love this little note right here. So when someone else speaks your name, the hiring process begins. The hiring process is almost always open. Yeah. So be aware of your environment. Lalo, do you like to give new people a chance, and how do you go about that?
Absolutely like to give new people a chance, because we all have to start somewhere. And just because you don't have experience doesn't mean that I don't want to hire you. That just means I'm going to hire you for a baby band. And we definitely have a lot of baby bands that are just starting. So, and it's really just about demonstrating a certain skill set that other people will vouch for. So I've definitely reached out to colleges that I know have good music programs, and I've talked to heads of departments and says, who are your standout students in? I was looking for a lighting person for a club band. I mean, the budget is very low, so I know I have to have somebody young with very little experience. And I started with, in this case, a professor of in the theater department, because I know they do lighting. And I said, who are your top students and that are about to graduate? And, I found people that were willing to just come in and start at the very ground level just to get their feet wet, because they demonstrated, they demonstrated their character and how they're going to work with people even before they had a job, just by other things they did. I've also asked venues, I recruit from venues a lot too sometimes. So like if I know that, a certain club, it could be a tiny club, has a good sound guy or a good lighting person or whatever, I'll ask them to recommend, because a lot of times those people are itching to get a tour job, and they have to start somewhere.
I also like how you noted that your company looks for diversity in your hires as well, and drawing from a different well.
That's a big priority for us. It's very difficult to find, obviously, because I don't think our industry is as diverse as it can be. But it's a big priority for me because, we have to. I'm Chicano, and there's not many of us out there, and I'd love to give people a chance, because a lot of times, we don't have those opportunities available to us, because a lot of people that get into the business do it because so and so is my cousin and he knew a guy that whatever. There's not everyone has those connections. So if you're going in cold and you have the dream of doing it but you don't know anybody that's done it before, it's a really difficult thing. So we try to be as open-minded as possible. As I said, it's not really about experience, but it's about character. It's about wanting to, and our job as managers is try to figure out what those characters are, what the character traits that we're looking for are, people that work well with others, that, are selfless in a way. I mean, this is a very selfless gig. We're basically, I like to think that we are in the service industry. We're servicing artists with our talents as best we can. So it's really about putting other people's, you're trying to make other people as happy as possible. But that brings me joy. I like taking care of people, and that character trait serves me well as a tour manager. If I was somebody that loved to complain about shit, that's not somebody I want on a crew. That's not somebody.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
You also make good guacamole.
And also to your point, David, about your reputation precedes you. That's absolutely right. You know, if you walk out of a building and someone has a good thing to say about you, that was a really good day. If And the converse is true as well. If you treat people like shit constantly, that's gonna that reputation is gonna stick with you, and we don't want that. You know, that's the worst thing is finding somebody, or somebody that might be a great guitar tech, but he's a curmudgeon. You know, that's a big red flag. I don't want to hire that person because everyone else has to live with him. We're a small bubble, really, of you know, a crew has to be a really, you know, tight knit group of people that all get along well, and that's not easy, and not always successful. So I'm also not afraid if I made a hire and that person is not gelling well with others. I've dismissed people, you know, immediately. Because it's not something that I think is going to get better if you're not demonstrating, you know, good teamwork right from the get. You're not somebody that's going to be holding on to a job very long, at least not for us.
That is a very important point, and definitely one of the tougher sides of our job. It's something that we have to face at just about every tour, hopefully, or hopefully not. And just making sure that you're hiring the right person.
We
you
also
know?
do make, just back to your point about diversity. We at least with Jack's tours, we make a conscious effort to hire more women. I would love to hire more people of color, but it's very difficult. But we definitely want to do that, and not just in positions that are traditionally considered, you know, female positions, like hospitality coordinator or things like that. Like I'd love this. I love to see. For the last several years, we've had a woman LD on Jack. It's sort of worked out that way, but I also made a conscious effort to collect those resumes and interview those people first, because if I find, you know, that it's just a lot of times about opportunity and just getting your foot in the door so you can get that interview, and knowing that I don't want to start with necessarily the top name or that comes up to me, or like I want to start with it, maybe, you know, well, who else in this pool of people that I can interview has maybe not had the opportunity to do it, or because, you know, the big name is available or whatever. I'm not necessarily interested in that. I want to find the right person, but I also want to find the right person that's going to make us more diverse and more complete. I think I would love our crews to look like, you know, society as a whole, and we're not all white males, so we have to like make a conscious effort to do that, not just like, well, I tried and no girl applied or no woman applied. But that's not how it works. You have to go out and
Yeah. You
purposely
have to work hard.
you have to work harder. Yeah, for sure. You have to. It's not just gonna fall on your lap. You know, you have to go out and look for it. So that's why, you know, the example of going to colleges and going to clubs and really trying to recruit people in those environments is key for us, especially for developing acts, for baby bands. When you get to your bigger bands, then obviously experience is very key, because at that level the stakes are too high for us to gamble on new hires. But like with all management companies, we have our roster is filled with bands that you've never heard of that are just starting out. And those bands, as long as they continue touring, then you're gonna, you know, tour with them and gain more experience with that band.
And that's that's one of the best ways to quickly advance in this industry, is to get a job with a baby band on a big management company. Because if you get in the door and you impress, there's every chance that they're going to put you on something bigger. And there is no, you know, this industry, I've seen people accelerate from club tours to arena tours in 6 months, a year.
Yeah.
You know, if you're good enough, you're old enough in this industry. So
that happened with Foster the People. They started with as a club band for us, and and their LD had just graduated college, is brand new gig, but he demonstrated a lot of ability and talent, and now the guy's like massive. And the band, of course, helped that they blew up. But But you're right. Even if the baby band doesn't blow up, if you're good and you demonstrate really strong ability that we're looking for, we're definitely going to hire you for the bigger bands, and your reputation will precede you. So that's super important.
So getting that call once your name has been out there, and usually you'll get, I mean, usually what happens with me is I'll get a call from or email from management or another tour manager or an agent or somebody saying, hey, either, hey, I put you up for this, you might get a call, or you just get a call and say, so-and-so referred you and can you talk? Or are you available? And something that I would recommend is, I do a really, really thorough research on my end as well before I have that call. I'm checking references as well. Sometimes management isn't going to tell you who the artist is.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a
Yeah.
pet peeve of mine, because, and I understand why sometimes, like, maybe there's a change that's being made. Maybe the tour is, the tour planning is a little bit on the down low at the moment, but I also find it a bit challenging because, I think, what other industry are you expected to take a job before you know who you're working for? And
That's a
like,
very
if
good
the
point.
person is, say they have, I don't know, like, say that they have a drug problem or something, and I feel very strongly about, or say that, it's, I don't say, I mean, I do drink but a little bit, but let's say I don't drink, and I feel very strongly like I want to work with sober artists and they're not a sober artist. It's like, I feel like, so there's a bit of a balance there, and it kind of, I like to try to do my research as much as I can. If I'm not sure who the artist is, I try to research management and just get an idea of the culture, the vibe, maybe who the other acts they work with, are.
Yeah. You
Because
can tell a lot from what you see online, like looking at there's been a lot of times where I've heard of an act that, or got a call for an act, and I have never heard of them, and quickly go to YouTube. Okay, what are they doing? Is it a band, a DJ,
Mhm.
an act with dancers? And so you can kind of see what their last tour was, what they've been doing, and sort of in a way quickly size up, is this a theater level, an arena level act,
Mhm.
or something that is a smaller act that you're going to have to grow. But yeah, you
Yeah.
can, doing your research on not just the artist and what they've recently been doing, but like you said, the management company, who else they work with.
Mhm.
And usually sometimes you can find up industry articles written about the manager that you may be interviewing with. It's good
Yeah.
to know these people in the industry. You actually, there's been times, like I said, about making the link between the two of you smaller. You can see through either socials or the industry that, like, oh, you worked with so and so,
Mhm.
I did this job with them once, or I met them on this, and you can maybe bring that up in the interview to help make it a smaller world and break
Mhm.
the ice a little bit.
Yep. And
But
socials can be great for small, like if it's a
yeah,
smaller band, a baby band, or it's a small management company, sometimes they don't have a website, or maybe they didn't have an article, written about them that you can Google easily. But, Facebook or Instagram, like, socials are really good for that. Just getting a vibe,
yeah.
of,
But if you don't know who the artist is and you don't know much about the management, regardless, going into that phone
Mhm.
call or that interview process, in person or virtual, you still know that you have to put your best foot forward, put the best you out there. And this is the time in your life when you really want to have the confidence in yourself to bring it out and speak about yourself in a very clear manner and communicate with that manager uh, what your experience is, what you're all about, your core beliefs, everything that we've been talking about can come out here. And also, having the confidence in yourself to, bring out the added value that you have, that you bring to the situation, whether it be your relationships in the industry that can help with, budgets, but also, like you said, just having different mentors and resources in the industry.
Mhm.
Um, Go ahead.
I was going to say also, something we talked about yesterday was, and this is something that you might have some good insight on, Lalo, is that, navigating that level of communication around the hiring process. Because sometimes you will get a call about the job, but then you don't hear back. And it's like, do you chase that person back? Do you wait? you know, and maybe they have other irons in the fire, which, you know, we've all been called and then it's just kind of gone nowhere sometimes. And it's because, you know, they were just putting out a wide net, you know, and it's not personal. But um when, you know, when should somebody call back? Like if you've called and they haven't heard from you, do you like to hear back or?
Well, I mean, we personally try to be as open and honest with the people that we're talking to. So because I almost never just look at one person. I'm talking to multiple people because it's such an important thing to find that, you know,
Yeah.
right team member. It's not just one position that we're filling. It's a position of a bigger whole. You know, we're plugging a spot that is part of a machine, of a cog. You know, you're a cog in the machine.
Mm,
So I'm almost always interviewing more than one person. So, you know, sometimes it takes a while for that decision to wind down. So I mean, you know, I wouldn't mind, like, I don't mind getting the follow-ups, you know, maybe a week after I've talked to somebody. It depends on the timeline, obviously. Like sometimes
yeah.
I'm in to find somebody because the tour starts next week. In which case, you know, sometimes I'm so busy that I don't have time to go back to the people that I've interviewed. So I absolutely don't mind people following up, you know, depending on when we're looking to tour. You know, if I'm touring, if I'm hiring for a tour that starts in 2 months, then yeah, you can hit me up in a week. But if I'm hiring for a tour that starts next week and you don't hear from me in 3 days, you can
Chances are.
get it. But I don't mind the follow up either. Transparency and openness is what we try to be about, because that's what we want back. So, you know, I'm a big believer
Yeah.
in rules. So that's a big part of it. So, and also I think the fact that someone will follow up, especially if I'm still trying to make a decision, that tells me that person is really engaged and cares about this gig, not, you know, not just because they're desperate for a gig, but if there's somebody that I've interviewed anyway, unless the interview goes terribly wrong, unless I talk to that person and I realize they're just not going to be right,
Mhm.
I'll try to tell them, you know, right away that we're sort of going another direction. But sometimes those decisions are come down to very minute, very last minute things, and there's no way to really quantify what or qualify what exactly I'm looking for. But
Yeah.
certainly
And
following up is important to show that you're actually, you know, going for it. And if you don't get it, say, well, you know, please keep me in mind for other things, because I've certainly done that. You know, like it's come down to like a couple of people, one person gets the gig, but then I end up hiring that other person that didn't get the gig for another band.
yeah.
You know, it's
And and also like sometimes like, you know, maybe there's a reason you couldn't say at the initial call who it was. And, you know, after you have a conversation with somebody, you know, the potential tour manager or whatever position you're hiring for might realize that they're not the right fit. And I think that there's something to be said for saying, "Hey, I don't know if I'm the right fit for this, but keep me in mind for other stuff." Because, you know, I've had people say that to me that I wanted to hire, and I am so impressed by that. You know,
yeah,
not everybody's the right fit
no,
for
no,
a client.
it has to work both ways.
Mhm.
You know, there's certainly gigs that I wouldn't do if I, as a tour manager, because I don't like that person's personality, at least the perceived one, the public one, or
Yeah.
I've heard.
Mm.
You know, some certain artists have reputations for being monsters, and you know, life is short. I'm not trying to work with an idiot or a jerk or, you know, people that aren't going to treat people well. You know, so
Mhm.
not every, you know, obviously not
Yeah.
everyone has that, you know, is able to do that, but
Right.
you know, you're absolutely right. It has to go both ways. You know, it has to be a mutually good fit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's safe to say that, I mean, you're interviewing the management as much as they are interviewing you. So commonly, we put together some questions that we're commonly thinking about as we're getting interviewed. The manager will ask you questions about your personality and your background, but typically in the interview process, we are also asking questions back, like what size is the tour? How long is it going to be? What crew or staff is on board already? What's working, what's not working with your team? Is this a new tour starting up? And it's the beginning of a cycle, or are you in the middle of this cycle and you're replacing somebody? All of these have big implications as to what that manager is looking for in the situation they are in, because they're trying to find the best fit, the best person. But the better you can figure out what their story is, so you can best address them, or bring bring your best self to the table, is key. So asking stuff like, what's the setup on the stage? And, how does the band and crew travel? Are there hotel rooms? Are hotel rooms solo or expected to be shared? These are, without getting ahead of yourself, these are things that will help you in the interview process. It sort of lets the manager know that you're already thinking about these things, and you can get the wheels turning with a few answers. You can start getting some things done if you were to be hired. You know what I mean? Like it helps them know that you know exactly what needs to be done if they give you the job.
That's right. It's also if a prospective employee is asking the right questions, that's also a good thing for us, because it shows that they're really thoughtful. They've thought this through. They have experience. They know what they ask the right questions. Especially if they're replacing somebody, the big question should be, well, what happened to the other guy?
Yeah.
Maybe that's
Yeah.
gonna be all right. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right about that.
And also,
I think this also ties to. Oh, go ahead.
No,
Andrea.
go on.
Well, I was going to say that it's probably at this point in the interview that it's a good time to tell management what your core values are in hiring, that you are bringing diversity and inclusivity to the table. And this should be one of your selling points, that you're bringing value to the table because these things matter to you. And it just planting those seeds will have a big impact with management on your character, and also put you into the hiring process, because a lot of the times, if you get the job, then there's maybe one or two or more positions that need to be hired, if not a full-blown crew. So at that point, you're going to be instrumental in hiring the rest of the team, or filling in the blanks. And you want to make sure that manager knows that you care about those things, even if it's not on their radar. They've got this awesome person thinking about the right way to do the job out there that best represents them and their artists, because that's ultimately what you're doing. You're a soldier of that management company and representing them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely right.
What was I gonna say? Oh, something that actually I was just looking in the chat here, and it's something that 5-1 brought up that I thought was really interesting. It's having an interview with the artist, because some artists want to actually be part of the interview process. And I've talked to almost every artist I've ever worked with. Sometimes they just trust management and they're like, here, hire this person, but then I want to meet them. They want to, I've had a couple times where they have been an active part of the process. Like I talk to management, it's almost like management's vetting them. And then it's like, we're going to let you talk to so-and-so and see how that goes, so that is potentially part of the process. Do your artists work with that, or do you just kind of hire? And
depends on the artist. Yeah, it really does. But and depends on the position. Usually
Right.
The artist is really only engaged with tour manager or the hospitality coordinator or an assistant, things like that. Generally, if it's a tour manager, yeah, we definitely want to put them in a room together on a call, because because we like them doesn't mean that they're going to like them. Or if in a good position where we have 2 or 3 really great candidates for a gig, then yeah, the artists will have the deciding vote. Ultimately, that's who we work for. So it's just that most artists do, at least in our experience, they trust managers to do that stuff for them. But as I said, with the tour manager being such an intimate, position with the band, it has to be a good personality fit, because they're not going to be asking you, what experience you have, or
Hmm.
what if you're good at Excel. They want to know if you're a good hang, if you're
Yeah.
gonna somebody that you can.
Yeah, that's totally true.
Totally. And you know what? I'm gonna say that, like, as long as I've been doing this, it's like, especially certain artists you work with, it's never gonna get over being a little nerve-wracking. Like, it's like all of a sudden you're just hanging out with this person that you just see all over TV,
I
you know?
I had to drive Jack to a gig. I mean, this was years after this was like probably 5 years after working with him, and I had to give him a ride to Pomona from LA for a gig in my car, just me and him. And I was so nervous about what to play, like on my iPod. I was like, oh,
Real thing.
Mine Oh God. I know. You just sit back once in a while, you're like, you float above yourself for a minute and you go, yeah, I'm hanging out with this person.
yeah, it's still,
Yeah. Yeah.
hopefully you don't get too jaded where that still doesn't, because we're ultimately, most of us are in this because we love art, we love
Yeah.
music, and we have so much respect for the people that are at the top of their game doing it professionally, that
Yeah.
if you're not nervous about it and you're just jaded about it, then, well, that's not good either. You want people that are doing it because they love this job, they love tuning a guitar, or they love lighting, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
If you don't love what you do and you don't have a passion for it, you're not going to survive much, because it's going to read. That's what the artist is. They're doing it for love and passion, so the crew should as well. We shouldn't just be doing it for a paycheck. It's the last thing we want.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I perversely really enjoy job interviews and calls with new management. I really like it.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
came from having a bad experience with an artist maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and it didn't work out. I got put on this new artist, an artist who's now well known, and it just didn't work. And I did a lot of soul searching after it, and I realized that it just was not a personality fit with this artist. And I had a conversation with management afterwards, and they were like, look, we think you're great, the agent thinks you're great, business management thinks you're great, but it just wasn't a fit with the artist. And I've started taking that into job interviews, because if you realize that probably there's 3 or 4 or 5 people lined up who can all do their job well, if we take that as an assumption, it might be true, it might not be true, but that management is probably going to go on some intangibles, like personality, how you get on with management, how they would perceive you would get on with the artist. And those things you cannot really control. You can be the best version of yourself, but ultimately, if you're yourself and they still don't choose you for that gig, well, that wasn't the right gig for you. And yeah, that's hard. That maybe sounds a little basic, but I think if you go into it thinking that way, then maybe you won't set yourself up for a fall so much. But yeah, so if you can kind of detach yourself from that and just relax a little bit, be yourself, and obviously show that you know how to do your job, then I think 8, 9 times out of 10 you will be successful for the right type of gig for you. But one thing I really, really don't like is talking about money. I love everything up until that point, but when it comes to negotiating, man, I hate that part. It really, really sucks for me.
There's two in that I completely am with you on the money thing. I also suffer from that, because I'm out here as a tour manager. I'm doing it because I really love doing it, and yeah, the money is great, but I'm definitely not one to haggle, and not one to, like, if I made an offer that's fair, I'm 9 times out of 10 I'm not going to counter. I'm just going to see, like, that seems fair to me, so let's move. Let's keep it going. But I just, to go back to a little bit what you said, Doug, and it reminded me of something, that when we're hiring a crew, especially a tour manager, we're hiring somebody that's not only going to work for the artist, but is going to work for the manager. So the biggest red flag, and if I'm calling references, one of the things that other managers will say is that, if you're known or have thrown managers under the bus because shit goes wrong, right? Or somebody routes something that it's like it's like totally boneheaded. Like, why did they do it this way? They could have done it that way. If we hear about a tour manager or somebody in the crew saying, "Oh, fucking management, they fucked that up," right? They're just sort of trying to have this camaraderie. Well, that's a big no. You have to you have to serve two different bosses, or sometimes three or four. So definitely not, you have to try to understand different perspectives. But back to your money, the money conversation. It's funny. I've tried. Usually, almost always, I have a budget in mind, and I know what my rate, my scale, my sort of range is. But a lot of times, I will ask, what are you expecting to make? What did you make on your last gig? And then if it meets with our budget, if it's higher or lower, I'll say, okay, yeah, we can do that, and I either save some money or I'm going to spend a little more than I thought I would spend. But, usually when I do a budget, I have a range of what we can pay for that position. And usually I'm not going to be even interviewing somebody if I know that, you make double what I have to pay, then I'm not even going to usually call you about that, because the budget is a budget. We have to stick to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so or I'll start by saying our budget is this, and plus. When I hire somebody, I like to lay everything out on the table in terms of what they can expect with per diem, with hotel sharing, with the level of hotels that we're staying in, with retainer or not, things like that. What class of service they're flying on a plane. All those things have to be laid out, I think, right from the get-go, because as much as we're hiring you, you're accepting us as people that you're going to be working with. So I don't want there to be any misunderstanding or misrepresentations at the beginning, because then that'll just lead to resentment or people thinking that I was misleading in any way. So everything usually is above board with us. And I like to think that we start by knowing what sort of an acceptable range of salaries are for that position. I mean, I know what a guitar tech makes, I know what a lighting person makes, and I know what ranges those things exist in. So, and there are certainly some bands that pay way more, but then there are others that pay less. So, it's a fine balance, but generally it works out, I think.
Right, and that's there's a lot of people in the comments saying the same thing, that they struggled to put a value on what they do, and fear that they're underselling themselves a lot of the time. And personally, I can identify with that. I think we kind of go around in the dark as tour managers and as crew in general in this industry, because there are no set norms. Like you've alluded to, you probably have a range on either side of what you would typically pay a lighting engineer on an arena tour. So if somebody comes in, double, that's gonna throw up red flags. So you're gonna need to know in what ballpark you're working. But if somebody, let's say you're hiring a tour manager, and that person comes to you and says, "Look, this is my day rate. I know what I'm worth." One thing that always kind of pops up in my head is, and when I'm hiring myself, if somebody comes to me, especially if I'm hiring somebody who's perhaps more experienced than the tour is, if I'm on a theater tour, but I'm hiring somebody that's come off of, an arena tour, if they follow up and say, "Look, this is my rate, but I know the size of tour you're doing, so I'm willing to talk to you." Does that go a long way for you, or does that say to you, "Oh, I can get them for less"?
Yeah, but then usually if the conversation starts that way, we're already sort of starting off on a potential road down resentment. I hate resentment road, and I'd rather them feel comfortable with with what I'm offering versus compromising and just shrugging and saying, "Well, I guess that'll be okay." I have to feel like, you know, what I'm offering is something that they feel good about, because value is very important, and making people feel valued for what they're really worth is important. So, and even if I do have, even if somebody comes to me, and this has certainly happened, where say I budget $3,000 a week for a certain gig on the road, and the person comes back and says, oh, I usually work for $2,000 a week. I'm not going to just say, oh, great, we saved $1,000, but I'm also probably not going to say, I'm going to give you three. I'm going to give, I'll probably meet somewhere in the middle, or say like, how about we start you at 25 and we work your way up. I've certainly done that before. And you know, if whether it's under or over what I'm budgeting, there's sometimes there's points where you know, we start at a certain rate and then we look at it later, depending on performance, depending on budget, depending on things like that.
Right.
I generally though don't like to be like, well, if the tour does well, can we come back and take a look at it later? Because then it's kind of like, well, hold on, I don't want you to like be eyeballing, you know, my books, or speculating on what the band might be making, and then you're thinking you deserve more money based on, like, if we had a deal for a certain amount, and then, you know, you realize that the band is selling gangbusters and merch, you can't come back and say, well, I've been working really hard and I feel I deserve more money now. Well, it's only been 2 months. Why don't we give it some time? You know, I like to be the one that recognizes when somebody is working really hard, and I feel like we can afford to pay them more, and I'll give, you know, bump up raises as we can. You know, it's not all about saving money, because sometimes, you know, you'll ultimately just get what you pay for, or you'll breed resentment, both of which you don't want. So it's a
Right.
fine balance, but there's no set solution. But certainly, as much as someone wants to represent their value and know what they're worth, as managers, as people that are hiring, we also have to give people a salary that shows that we respect them as well. Because if you're just trying to save money, if you're just trying to get the best, you know, outcome for your artist with the bottom line, then you're going to have to deal with those resentments and those people that are not really motivated because they're not being paid what they feel like they're worth. So
Right, and that brings us kind of back around to what we talked about just before we got on the chat today, when you said you kind of play the long game.
Yeah.
You're looking longer term, and I think that's a massive thing. And can you explain briefly the example that you gave us earlier about days off and promo?
yeah, so you mean like in terms of like pay? So like so yeah, so you might hire somebody, for example, for a certain rate a week, and then after you hire them, you get your promo schedule and it's jam packed. Now all of a sudden, instead of when you had one show that day, you have to have a TV show or a radio show in the morning. We've certainly done things where you have to say yes to certain things. If somebody asks you to do morning becomes eclectic on the same day as your show that night, that's a super early wake up, a super long day for the crew. It's imperative for us for crew to feel that they're not being taken advantage of. So I will, if we kill a day off, for example, and now it turns a 4 run, you know, 4 shows in a row run to 8 shows in a row because you killed a day off, you're getting paid double that day. We follow overtime rules as much as we can, with the caveat that, you know, we this is an overtime job anyway. You know, we function in overtime, so that's why we don't do hourly work. It'd be impossible to quantify. But yeah, I mean, we try to be as fair as possible with that, because the number one thing for us is we don't want resentment to breed among the crew. If they feel that managers don't give a shit about them, and unfortunately, I've had a situation where, you know, where it came to a head where we were all so busy in trying to get this tour cycle up and running and the record release and all that stuff, that we were go with not much, you know, thought to how it's affecting all these people that are busting their ass for you. So we almost had a mutiny on tours. Like, this can't happen. We can't work this way. That's the absolute worst thing you want to do. So now we just try to avoid it from the get. So we set up certain rules in our management office that if you're going to be, working more hours than we initially said, we think you should be fairly compensated for it. And we try to do that because we don't want resentment to breed. We want to keep people as long as possible. And the last thing you want is somebody to just leave your tour saying pissed off because they feel they weren't treated well. I hate that. As a person that really believes in the golden rule. I think that that's a failure on management part, or to not recognize that and fix it. So instead of doing that, we, like you said, we take the long view on things and say, it's going to cost us a little more money this week because of this thing that happened, but we're going to have a happier crew for it. And that might not mean, pay. It could be like, I know you guys have been busting your ass. It's been a really tough run of shows, or, the lighting rig is way bigger than you thought it was, and you're going to be working extra hard. Well, we'll bring in a massage therapist once a week. Or we'll upgrade catering, or we'll do a crew dinner to build morale. All of those things are really, really important to maintaining a happy and healthy crew. So we definitely.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because, and the comments are saying that as well, resentment on the road, especially things like that, can really tip people over the edge, especially if they've been working their asses off. Like you say, this is an overtime.
Doug froze.
Oh, I froze.
No, yeah, just a small. We got
like I was saying, people are they're working 18-hour days, and then suddenly a show drops in on their only day off in 6 days, and that can be, if it's a late night TV show, it's gonna have to be done. The opportunity is too big to turn it down. But and you have to go into touring knowing that will happen. You'll be looking forward to that one day off, and maybe even your wife will be flying in, or your husband will be flying in for that day off, because it's New York. It happens. You have to just suck it up. But if it's really nice to hear that management thinks about that, because it's not always the norm, in my experience.
Our goal as managers doing hiring is not to have to do it very often. So if I find a guitar tech that I love, or a crew that is just solid, I'm going to do everything I can to keep them happy, because I don't want to have to hire somebody else because we blew it by not treating them well. So we're trying to be mindful of that all the time. I don't think anybody likes the hiring process. I certainly don't, but it's a necessary thing. So I try to do it as little as possible. So if we find somebody we like, we try to do our best to keep them.
Absolutely. Well, that's great to hear. I wanted to just briefly touch on how we structure pay in this industry. And, like everything else, there are no real set norms. Day rates are pretty typical in Europe and here in Canada as well. They are, you will encounter, especially when you're starting out, if you're talking day rates with people, you will encounter certain people looking for half day rates on travel days or days off. My advice to you in that would be, no, as a tour manager, you're always working. You may have a day off where the bus isn't even moving, but your artist wakes up, has to go to hospital, and your whole day is spent with the artist in the hospital. So you're on call, you're working. Half day rates for a tour manager, I mean, once you get beyond a certain point, you don't really hear about half day rates. But on the van and trailer tours, for me growing up in the UK, I used to have it quite often, and it's a no deal. It's and that should throw up red flags on your side, because that would say this person that's looking to hire me is really trying to pull a fast one, and that doesn't fly, especially as a tour manager. You're always working when you're on the road. Would be my, that's my advice. Weekly rates are more common in North America, in the US especially, I would say, below a certain point. So that kind of negates the whole thing of the half day rate, because if you're if you're working your rate out based on a weekly and then prorating it, then, you know, you just need to make sure that you are covered, excuse me, and you're comfortable based on the type of touring you're going to be doing. If you're doing 1 show a week versus if you're doing 6 shows a week, there's going to be a difference in the workload there. So you have to take that into consideration before you start agreeing a weekly rate.
Right.
And there, you know, one thing not to forget is to cover your advancing work. Now, this is, again, this gets, we all have different ways of doing this, and we talked internally, and I'm sure we covered this when we talked about this the last time. Seems like everyone has their own way of billing for advancing work. That may be a day rate based on the amount of shows. It may be a percentage of the days on tour. It may be a flat rate, or you can lump it in. I think, Mark, you said you lump it in with your rate and have just a one figure.
Yeah, I try to make it as simple for management as possible. You know, the less line items, the easier to read, and I try to make it a win-win situation. But that's definitely a artist to artist situation. You could be going in a van and trailer, or you could be doing an arena tour, depending on what tier level you're at. That discussion's going to vary, but I think finding a number that you're comfortable with and trying to kind of find something that works for both parties is the easiest, rather than management having to look at like 10 different things that you're going to do. And this is why this costs this, that, and the other. Just kind of putting those things together and doing an inclusive rate, I've found, has been a lot simpler and easier for negotiating.
Right.
Yeah, I would say that's true. Sometimes we do salaries too with people. Like if we're going to be gone for a year, rather than making individual budgets for every single leg of the tour, we just do one big one, and I know how much I'm going to spend on my salary costs for the entire tour cycle versus, you know, this tour cycle salaries are this, and what you know, it's generally just whatever's easiest for the business manager, however they want to see it.
Yeah, and that kind of gives you, as on the tour manager side, that gives you this year where you know your salary, you're working on this one project. It gives you closure of that period. You're set. You know, it's much easier than if, you know, you start getting into the weeds with oh, we've got this festival coming up, but it's going to take me a bit more time to advance on the front end, and et cetera, et cetera. You know, you sign up for the project and you accept that there's going to be things that pop up here and there. You know what I mean? But
that's typically the strategy I like to bring to the table, because Lalo mentioned it himself, like he's in for the long-term relationship here. And, you know, you're not just going show by show. You may be looking at it over, you know, they're hiring for some shows that are happening over a short amount of time, but ultimately, if you can get the manager to look at you as the long-term investment and look at your pay range to not just be this one budget or just a few days, but let's look at the value of this person added up over the year. Look, we've got 20, 30, or, 100 shows lined up this year to bring in, X amount of dollars. I like to bring that strategy to the table that, like, look, a salary for me would be a really small percentage, if not less than 1% of what you're bringing in for the year to make sure that I'm on your team and you've got the right person looking out for you. So it's, that's a strategy that I like to bring to the table in the in the interview process, is to try to get the manager to think of me as a long-term employee instead of just a gig or two,
Yes, absolutely. And the other way that the other term that you'll hear quite often is retainer, and that is something that typically only really happens at the higher level of touring. But a retainer basically is a percentage of your regular rate that retains you, so that you're getting paid on non-working time. So if an artist is touring for 18 months and then is taking a 6-month break, you will be paid through the 6-month break a portion of what you would have earned on the touring cycle. but you have to be available for the artist. So, let's say they get a late night TV thing on a couple of days notice, you need to jump, you need to be ready for the artist. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but retainers were more common back in the 90s when things were when there was a bit more money swirling around in the industry.
Well,
Yeah.
they weren't common for me in the 90s. I think
it's not a word to hear too much anymore.
Yeah, it's every band is different. It's every management company is different. Not everybody can afford to pay those retainers. In fact, I would say, like you said, it's very few that can afford to pay retainers, which makes it really tough for we're basically itinerant employees, right? We if you go from one gig to the next and you don't have anything in between, you still have bills to pay. You still have to figure it out. So it's tough.
Yeah.
It's
Lalo, to that degree, something you mentioned earlier about having tons of acts on a resume and you question how long they may have been with them. I find that I've worked with a lot of acts and I was always concerned of maybe looking that same way as well. But the artists it's so common for artists to do short runs nowadays or to not pay for that time. So, I have to go find other work if that artist isn't going to keep me on board. So ultimately, I've got to make that decision to leave that project and go elsewhere. So then you can find yourself working for a couple of acts over, a summer and a fall season. It's as you get to higher level of touring, it's, it can be more common. So that in that way, it sort of maybe works for you instead of against you.
As Mary Jo said earlier, you don't have to list every single band you've done. You can, to me, because that's it's quantity is not important, it's quality. And if you have 3 bands on your resume and you've been touring for 10 years, that's like gold star right there. That's the person you want, because that means that they went into numerous band situations where that band liked them so much they wanted to keep them around for 3 or 4 years, for the whatever length of their tour cycle is. That's amazing. And it's happened multiple times. Well, great. That's the person we want. Whereas, the opposite is true. If you have 20 bands in that same period, no one wanted to keep you around long enough.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that flies in the face of what some people might think, because if you've got this big list of amazing artists, you may think, oh, wow, amazing, he's worked with X, Y, and Z. But, it's
Keep a job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think I have a few, like I was saying earlier, it's we all get asked to fill in or cover for somebody for 2 weeks, or, or you do a short run because somebody needs somebody. Like I had an artist a couple years ago who came over here to do underplays, and they were from Europe, and they did most of their touring there. But it was such a short time. It was like they didn't want to do the visas, and it made sense. So I just covered that. That didn't go on my resume. Not because I didn't think they were worthy. It was it wasn't really my gig. It just, but then it also kind of depends on the gig. I do have one that's on my resume that I did only do for 3 weeks. However, the scope of that gig was really big, and pulling it all together, and the management company was pretty big. So I think that there are exceptions to the rule, but yeah, for the most part, it's I just kind of leave those off, or sometimes you can even just do a list at the end and say, management companies that I've worked for, or clients that you've worked for, and just do a little short client list, but you don't have to specifically say when. To me, that would imply oh, I've done these side projects, in between, or,
Right.
there's ways to handle that.
I also wouldn't get, if we're talking about resumes again, I wouldn't get too wordy with things, or put, a mission statement that's half a page long, or what your goals are. You're trying to get a job as a guitar tech. I get that. So I don't need you to tell me that the guitar tech has to tune the guitar and keep, change string.
Yeah.
I know already. So really I'm looking at band management and then how long they've done it. Those are and then of course the references, as I had said before. A lot of the other stuff is not that critical. In fact, it gets a bit annoying, but
yeah, it's true.
Short and sweet.
Yeah, and one last point I wanted to make about when we're talking about money and negotiations is I think it's important, especially if you're working below the top level. Let's say you're in clubs and theaters. It's important to go into the negotiations with an clear idea of what you want and what's important to you, because let's say you're applying for a position on a one bus one truck tour, or a bus and trailer tour. There's every chance that you might come up against shared hotel rooms, especially if you're working with Canadian artists. That might be a deal breaker for you. Now, if you go into the job interview and say, look, yeah, I don't do shared hotel rooms, put it on the table, leave it there, that's going to leave a really shitty impression. If you go into the situation, look, you know, you explain, look, privacy is a real thing for me. I really value having a solo hotel room. I'd be willing to be a bit flexible on my rate, but this is something that's really important to me. I think that goes a whole different route, and it's something I've come up against when I'm hiring. I had a guy, he'd been on the road for 30 years, and he needed his privacy. He needed a solo room. So on a shared hotel room tour, and he did exactly that. And obviously we granted it, and he, you know, I didn't ask him to drop anything off of his day rate. I wanted to start well with him, but you know, I think how you approach those things makes a huge difference. And you will encounter, especially when you're hiring as a TM, you'll encounter people who say, this is my day rate, I don't go out for less than that. Great, more power to you. But I think how you approach these issues and how you communicate with a potential employer makes a big difference, because it reflects on that one issue, but also how you deal with your job day to day. If you're going to be that person that doesn't, you know, you got to be flexible in this job. So I think it shows that. For me, I'm 6'7". I can't sit in an economy seat in an airplane. I just can't fit in it. So that's a deal breaker for me. But you know, I bring it up in negotiations, and it's never been an issue for me, because I approach it in a not in that hard cut off way. It's something that's, like, you can see I'm sitting right here. You can see that I'm 6'7". So I think things that are important to you like that, as long as you approach them in the right manner, I don't see them as being a stumbling block.
It's way better to be upfront and honest right from the beginning at the process where you're discussing salary. Unfortunately, as somebody mentioned in the conversation, in the chat here, we suffer from not having a set standard of wages and pay across our industry. It's sort of all over the board. To a certain extent, I know what the ranges are, but it's weird. It's like talking about what you make with your friends. You just typically don't do it, or other roadies typically don't do it. You know, because sometimes, you know, you're most of the time people are getting paid different things for the same job, because of various factors, experience, or, you know, sometimes it is the guy that you really want that says, I'm not going out for less than this. And you have to say, all right, well, as long as you're not talking about what you make to the rest of the crew, I can do that. It's just, you know, because I can switch the budget. But as soon as, the biggest thing for me is that the hotel room stuff, although typically most of our bands, unless you're a baby band, we don't ask you to share. If they can afford, if they're in, you know, theater level and above, it's no room sharing. But it's club level, you know, if they say we can't do it, we have to say no, because that's going to have a ripple effect on everybody else. Well, why does he get it?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't I get it? So we try to be fair and equal with everybody within a point. You know, we're not going to pay everybody the same exact amount, but because everyone has different levels of experience and different needs. But yes, sometimes, you know, to reiterate what people have been saying in the chat, know your worth. It's important, but also, to Doug's point, be flexible. You have to be flexible, I think. because that's if you're trying to get a job and you're setting hard rules on things that you won't compromise on, well, then we have to move on. We have to make decisions that are good for the whole, not just for you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's a terrible look, especially on the interview process. That's a good way to just lose the job right there. Not making it more about yourself than the artist and the project that you're being considered for. So you're right. I'd rather be more flexible and just work for the greater good of the cause. And then as you settle into the tour, see what's important and negotiate for yourself as you see fit. But
Mhm. I think,
tread lightly going into the interview process with a
yeah.
list of demands. But if you're 6'7", there's something to be said about that.
Yeah.
A lot of the times security guards are rather large, and they need to say like, hey, I don't fit into a window, economy seat, and so you have to bring these things up. It's part of the process as well.
I think for me, like a way that I remain flexible is that my sort of one of my negotiating tactics is, I kind of go in with a number in mind, like we talked about. I'll talk to, peers, and you kind of have an idea of what people make. But if I can, and this also is a function of it being really uncomfortable for me to bring up you just feel like, what number should I bring up? So I usually try to throw it back at whoever I'm talking to about money. I say, well, what do you have in your budget? And if I can get them to start the conversation, then I don't know, for me, it just becomes more comfortable to negotiate from there. I might be able to be like, if it seems a little low, I could say, well, normally I would go out for this much, but how about we meet in the middle? Because then I'm in the driver's seat and it just feels so much comfortable for me to, much more comfortable for me to negotiate that way. Once in a while, they throw out a number that's way higher than you were thinking, and you're like,
Wor-
"Okay, I can live with that," and inside you're like, "Yes," but it
Yeah,
doesn't happen very often.
you're
But
right. When I'm doing hiring, I usually start with, this is what our budget is,
yeah,
because I don't want to get on the other end where someone quotes me a figure that's twice what I had in the budget, and I
yeah.
realize instantly that I've wasted my time because I
Well
can't afford it.
well, I had that happen once, and I think it's why I really started going to the asking what's in the budget first as well, is that, you know, I I threw out a number once, and it wasn't that really. I had checked with somebody I knew who was on the tour. It was upper, and I said, "Well, what do you think that this is a good ballpark?" I didn't want to ask them what I should make, but they said that's a good ballpark. And they had asked me, and I threw out the rate. It was reasonable, I thought, and then they didn't hire me because of that, and they didn't try to negotiate. Now, granted, I do think that they were trying to get somebody back who had left, so I think there was part of that, but, um, I'm always open to some negotiation. So if I can be the person that does the negotiation, that's when I started being like, "Well, what's in your budget?" Because then I know I can negotiate, but if I throw out a number and the other person thinks, "Oh my god, that's way too high," and they don't even try,
Yeah.
and it hasn't happened that often, but that's why I kind of
Yeah, that's
try to
true.
go
Because
there.
even if it's like we said before, getting in with a smaller act, maybe
Mhm.
what's in your budget is way less than what I would normally be asking for, but I want to work with you. Like I want to get in with this management company and show you my worth. So I'm going to take this lower gig now to uh, to get my foot in the door, and hopefully that's the goal, is to build up the long-term relationship. So I'm flexible with it.
It's okay to say that when you're negotiating and
Yeah,
you're taking
Yeah,
what you're comfortable with. It's important to say, you know what, it's less than what I'm normally do, but I'll do it because of all the reasons you just said. That's really an okay, and in fact an important conversation to have. It's really important just to be as honest as possible as you can with yourself. So like, you don't always, for example, have to counter on an offer. If somebody offers you a rate that you are honestly comfortable with, don't feel like you have to be like, well, I have to counter because I know they're starting low, or they're trying to, they're just trying to lowball. No, if it's something
yeah,
that you're comfortable with and you're comfortable with it, be honest with yourself and be honest with me. Don't just counter because that's what you were told to do. That's
right.
ridiculous
yeah,
to me, that you're just not being a team player.
Yeah.
And I know, especially if I know I'm offering you a really fair going rate for the job that I'm hiring for.
Yeah. Also, don't do what I did once early on in my career, and I got offered a job with an artist that like I loved. And I got off the phone with management and realized that I hadn't talked money. I was so excited to be working with them
Uh,
that I got off the phone and I was like, oh crap. Luckily, I got paid a fair wage. They knew me from another gig and it was great. But
Yeah, we try not to do that on the other side. You know, we're like, whoa, you know, they really like that band, so you can offer them less, save some.
yeah, it was a call I wasn't expecting to get. It was very early in my career and I was like, all right, yeah. Hang up the phone and I was like, oh crap, I don't know how much I'm making.
Well,
I
we
had
could,
to call them right back.
yeah, that's what you have to play it cool. You're like, yeah, that sounds pretty good. Might be available for that. Play it again, don't be hard to get.
um hiring crew 5-1. I think you
How
were
did
gonna
we
take
do?
that
Did we do?
one. We're gonna talk about, I think we were gonna talk about if we're hiring crew.
Was there anything else? No, we are not currently hiring. If anyone's asking.
No, like if we as a tour manager, did we touch on that?
No, we
we
haven't yet.
I don't think we have. We're kind of
No.
we're let's should we go questions? Because we've kind of touched on that kind of stuff.
Tour managers do hire crew a lot of times, depending
Yeah.
on their intimacy with the band. My situation is unique only in that I work for the band as the tour manager, and I work for the management office. So I get in on the ground floor and do everything. I build it all, I route it, and ticket prices with the agent. You know, all that stuff. I'm on the ground level, budgeting, hiring, which is not typical of a tour manager, but what can be typical for, like, for example, another client of ours has a tour manager they've had for 15 years, and they run with it. In that case, then I trust them more than I trust myself on hiring the new guitar tech that they might need or whatever. So being a tour manager is certainly puts you in that position to be able to recommend and or just do the straight up hiring, because they're also looking at the budget. They're also the eyes and ears on the road, which, you know, that's a really important perspective, because you know more than anybody. In fact, if I rely a lot on tour managers when I do the hiring. If a tour manager recommends somebody, that goes a long, long way. You know, obviously, I think any tour, for the most part, you start by hiring the tour manager, because then everyone you hire, you have to run it by the tour manager to make sure that they're cool with it too, or the PM. You know, whoever's going to be directly responsible for them, I think, should have a say in their hiring as well.
Yeah. And I think that's also, that is a place that we can take advantage of having that perspective of diversifying our crews. It's like, as tour managers, it's like we can work on expanding our network. We can be, like you said, Lalo, it's important to you to have diverse, touring parties. And if we're your eyes and ears and we're doing some of the hiring, then we need to start meeting more people, and
Yeah.
not just doing that, of course you want to call the people that because you're comfortable with them, you can trust them, they're good, but maybe start getting to know some more people.
Yeah.
Like knowing more women who are, that's the thing, is there's no shortage of, women or people of color doing this work. It's just that we don't always know them, so
There
get
is
to know them.
well,
Well, a shortage in, proportionately, yes, but
right. Yeah.
they're out there.
To go outside of your wheelhouse for sure, and knowing people is the big thing. Is expanding the circle, because once you're in my Rolodex, I don't have a real Rolodex, it's on my phone, but once
I want you to have a real Rolodex.
you're in there, and everyone goes in by like name, and then in the subject, or somewhere in the notes, I put what bands you work with and what you do, because when I'm searching for somebody, that's the first place I go to, is my phone. Because I know I've already vetted you, or I've worked with you before, or I got close to hiring you, but you're still in my phone. I've definitely hired people or have been unsuccessful in hiring people, but I just keep trying because I heard they're really good, or I really want to work with them. and you know, eventually it happens, or I keep trying. But certainly networking, getting to know people is very important. And somebody sent a list of roadies of Color United, which thank you very much. If anyone knows any others like that, please let me know, because it's our responsibility to do the legwork on that, and not just let it come to us, not just shrug your shoulders and say, well, didn't find any qualified candidates that were, you know, of color or women, so I'm not going to do it. No, we have to make it a priority. We have to make a commitment to that, and you know, at least for our part, we try to do that as much as we can.
I think we put, if there was a couple other ones in the chat. I put up she'sthemusic.com. It's for women. There's a big database of women, and the Equal Directory is another one. And then obviously Roadies of Color. Yeah. Well, yeah, definitely.
Or you put it in the chat. Although I'd prefer you.
I will email this to you.
Easy.
Are there any more questions? Because we're just about at the end here.
I just wanted to mention, you know, we talked about when we are hiring as tour managers, almost everything we talked about in regards of being hired also applies when you are hiring. Just flip the role. You know, you become the manager. As a tour manager, if you're hiring a backline tech, you want to be employing everything that we've discussed today that a manager is looking for you as a tour manager. You want to be speaking to people that you know and trust and getting their opinion on somebody. You want to be checking on references. You want, you know, the hiring process is pretty much, you know, it applies across the whole industry and other industries as well. So I don't know if that, when you're hiring as a TM, pretty much just put yourself in the shoes of the person that was hiring you when you got the job in the first place. I think will stand you in good stead.
Oh, I will say something else as well. When I look at a resume, even if they don't list references, if I know somebody that's worked for a band that they list, I will call that person I know in that band or that works with them, even if they're not listed as references, because that's, you know, I don't just want the people that have already been vetted to speak about you. I want the people that have no skin in the game at all, that might have just spent a year or two with you on the road, you know, to see what kind of person you are in general. That, you know, not necessarily your best friend on the road. I want to know who the person that, you know, was directly responsible for that. Question?
No, go on the question for Lalo.
May I have your email address is the first one. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a couple questions in our Q&A if you'd like to address a couple of them. From Elise, this is for you, Lalo. A while back, someone suggested I accumulate video testimonials from people I've worked with for. I have an arsenal of them. Some need to be updated, and I will usually put links to 2 to 4 of them in my letter of introduction. Do you think people will watch them? She would love to know your thoughts.
Personally, no, I would not click on stuff like that, because I'm not getting this, because I'm a person that's going to be calling references and calling people that I know that are in bands that you've listed. Having somebody do a video, at least for me, it's I'm not getting to the point of what, you know, the character that I'm trying to. It could just be that you're sticking a camera in somebody's face and say something nice about me. I find that awkward. I find that whole thinking about you asking somebody to do that is like cringy to me, but only because I would never ask somebody to do that. It's and to me might demonstrate a bit of, like insecurity in a way. I don't know. It's weird. I don't want to read too much into that, but no, definitely I would not click on those links. I would just call them and say, tell me about them, because certain things I read in inflection and tone. You know, when I'm asking them what type of person are they a team player? You know, what are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? You know,
Lalo, do you look at social media?
When I'm hiring somebody, that's a new thing and a good question, but depending on the role, yeah. I mean, if a guitar tech, you know, is into, you know, motorcycles and that's all they tweet about, I don't care, you know, who cares? But if they're a tour manager and they're, you know, obsessive about a certain thing that's a big deal, that might not gel well with the artist. So yeah, no, it depends on the role, but yeah, we would do that. So it is important to, you know that your social media is going to say something about who you are, and will be used not just for this industry but anybody, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you're engaged in certain politics that might not gel with the artist politics, and they're going to be engaged with that artist on a daily basis, sounds like a recipe for disaster to me, so I would avoid it.
That's a good
True.
point, and it's
Mm.
something we've said before, but you know, posting things on public forums, people are reading them, whether they're commenting it or not. People who are hiring are also reading them, and I'm thinking specifically of touring public forums that we have in our industry. You know, I have a running list of names who have posted things that are offensive that I wouldn't hire. I'm, you know, unapologetic about it. If it's borderline racist, sexist, bullying, any of the above, not a chance I'm hiring that person in the future. So, you know, there are people watching, there are people reading. Just be very aware of your online presence if you are applying for a position, because I've been contacted for work through social media. I've been told that somebody has looked up my social media, and so, you know, it's really easy to access that information, and it's equally easy to give yourself a big strike against your name if you do something dumb online.
It's safe to say then that the hiring process is happening right now. Like it's always happening, of how people will look at you and how you put yourself forward, as a person. Because you're right, it's beyond the, like the skills. Maybe we'll get to that point, but at first, I want to know the kind of person you are. What's the vibe going to be like out there on the road? I got to live with you. You know, I want to make sure that we can gel first, because then I need that to match first, because I got a list of a ton of other people that have the same skill sets you do. So let's make sure it's a personalities fit.
Someone asked if I looked at LinkedIn, or we looked at LinkedIn. Typically, no, but if that's the best reference point for some people, like if their LinkedIn is stronger than their resume, or they might direct me there, I'll look at it. But typically, it's not a place where we're going to. I would say that looking at social media is probably more important, because to me, the resume is LinkedIn. It's the old LinkedIn. It's just, or it's the new. Yeah. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'd
I think
rather have just the list.
I think most people I know in touring, I didn't have a LinkedIn until this time. And I was like, I should make a LinkedIn, you know? So, because a lot of students have them and it's a good way to connect, but I still don't really know how to use it really well. But, you know, yeah, I think in touring, it's so word of mouth that it hasn't been as much of a thing, you know?
Yeah. Our biggest goal, if we're aiming for diversity, though, is to open up, you know, the pool of talent that is possibly available by just being more open-minded in terms of, you know, who we're trying to, you know, we have to go out and find those people, you know.
Yeah. And we had one from Deanna in the Q&A, and it was what would any of you suggest for an almost graduated student in event management, for opportunities with tour productions and managers? What positions would you offer to somebody trying to get their foot in the door in the music industry? I mean, I think in pretty much all of our previous sessions, it's like start from the bottom.
Coordinator,
Learn everything you can locally.
whatever.
You
I'll
know.
tell you one thing, that my first job as a tour manager, well, I started I used to be a high school teacher, actually, and then I got hired to be a tour manager because they figured if I could take care of them, I could take care of a bunch of students. I could take care of them, which but you know, when I first started, I was doing, you know, I was driving the van, I was selling merch, I was settling the show, I was getting people to hotels. You have to wear all those hats at the start. So
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing to getting your foot in the door is starting, you know, you're the lowest on the totem pole, so you have to just be willing to do whatever it takes, or
Yeah.
do your job is available. But PA or PC would be the start, I would say.
Or local runner, local production runner.
I
Could be a
actually
stagehand.
I hired somebody who was our runner because I really liked their vibe, and they told me that they also do sound and tour manage, because a lot of local crew we meet at venues do touring gigs, but those touring gigs aren't available all the time, so they need a job, and that's why I like to call clubs that I like, not just in LA but anywhere, to see who their local crew is that either has touring experience or wants to tour. And if they're good, the manager that I speak to is going to recommend them, and that's how another way of finding new people.
That's a great reference for any of our students that are trying to find a foundation. I think we've said in previous webinars, like, see which your local venues are hiring, get your foot in there and start kind of working the inner outings of your venue. And like Lala was saying, like, management and artists and tours and things are coming through these rooms on a yearly basis. So you may get referenced right there if management are looking for people that are working in-house. It'll take you to tour, which is a common thing.
Yeah. Yep. And I think also, like, doing the local and entry level stuff, it's not just entry level. It's like you are learning all the skills that you need. Like, it's challenging to it would be challenging to jump right into tour management. It's like going from A to Z without going through the other 24 letters. It's like you got to get there and you learn all the skills that you need to know. It may not feel like it when you're pushing a case, but you are learning something, pushing a case at 5 a.m. locally. But guess what? You're learning that people load in at 5 a.m. to build a stage so that the big arena show can come in. And when you have to budget for that, you're going to know.
Yeah.
So you are learning something. Somebody just shot me a message and said, make sure to let everybody know to PDF their resume.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a good one. Yeah.
Good point. Opening a Word doc or that just is formatted incorrectly or covers more than one page, keep it to a one-page resume if you can, because the one-page PDFs just pop up as right in your inbox. You don't have to click on anything, which is helpful sometimes, and you want to go direct as much as possible.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think we're getting to wrap up here. I wanted to just quickly shout out, there's a really great documentary on Netflix called Big Flo and Ollie Hip Hop Frenzy. It's a couple of French rappers I'd never heard of playing massive stadium shows out in France, and it gives a really, really great insight to what life on the road is like and what dealing with an artist is like. No BS. It's very real depiction of what the pressures on an artist and their crew are like. So I'm pretty sure we have it here in Netflix Canada. It's in French but subtitled, and I'm pretty sure it's in Netflix US as well. So go check it out.
Can you put it in the chat, Doug?
Yes.
Oh, we've got all the production coordinators hopping in saying PC is not an entry level job.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely, I'm wrong about
The chat is blowing up.
Right. You're right. But it is what it is. It's one of the it's entry-ish level. How about that?
It's a step towards tour managing, if that's your end game, for sure.
We meant pushing cases by PC. Sorry for the
pushing cases. Yes, that's what
that was what we were going for. I'm sorry about that.
Any position on the road can be an entry position on the road. I started as a tour manager. You just start at a different level. So it can be, because you can progress really quickly in this industry. It can also be a really well established, great position, as we established on our previous episode about those roles. But anything can be an entry role in touring.
Yeah, just and to that point, I have hired PCs that had never toured before as a PC, because I know their skill set was such that they could handle it, and all we had to do was really just they'd teach them how to do it and what our expectations were. So I'm not totally wrong.
No, that's true. Sometimes it's about skill set with people and them having the right personality. Like I said earlier, I hired a friend once, and it was her first tour, and I knew she was just right for that tour. And within 2 weeks, she was calling the truck pack.
Yeah.
And she was one of the best production or stage managers I've worked with, you know, but she had the skills, she had the personality, and she just needed to just learn
Sell, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like selling your capability
Mhm.
to the manager. But this has been great. I really enjoyed this one. There was so much chat. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lalo. This was a great episode.
Who do I send my invoice to?
Oh, we got a couple of tour accounts sitting here, so don't send it to us.
Next week we kick off webinar number 53, building a tour, every single Monday, same time, same place. Keep an eye out for our socials. We'll be posting with the upcoming webinar and information. If you've been with us from the beginning, you're comfortable with the layout, and we'll be back next week. Thank you, Lalo. Again, it was a
Thanks, guys.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Go Dodgers.
Bye, everybody. Have a great week.
Bye.